Hey everybody, it's your old comic book pal Chuck Dixon with another episode of Whatcha Readin. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, "What are you reading? What do you read when you're not writing?" So let's just dive right into it. Now I swear I have no connection with Cinebook, the publisher. Just see, it might seem like I do, but I just of all the comic publishers out there, they're the ones I most frequently read, mostly because they are reproducing in English for the first time a lot of classic European comics, generally from France and Belgium. And I have to compulsively read these because it's good stuff. This is a recent pair of comic albums featuring Marsupilami, the Spirou and Fantasio spin-off character. And these two books form one story. It's a two-parter. And just good stuff. If you're not familiar with Marsupilami, he's this fictitious endangered species that lives in a fictitious South American country. He's a jungle dweller. He's a badass. He's not that big an animal, but he's a real badass. Takes on a lot of the aspects of basically a superhero. But the thing about Marsupilami is the thing that's fascinating about Marsupilami is there's no clear reason why he does the things he does. He'll often come into the story on the right side, but he's not always there. He's a very mercurial character, driven by, I guess, animal instincts or the needs of the moment. And you're never quite sure in a Marsupilami story where he's going to show up. And he always shows up at key times. I think that's what's fascinating about the character is all the things we don't know about him, that he's very much an animal. Because if you have pets, if you're around animals, you realize you don't really know what they're thinking. I mean, we give them anthropomorphic elements in our own lives. Oh, my dog is happy, or my cat is content, or my parrot's angry at me. I don't know. And generally, these are just guesses. And that's what I like about Marsupilami. He's an animal who we're not quite sure why he's doing all the things he's doing. But luckily for the characters in the story, he's there to help them out. He's kind of like Tarzan if Tarzan had trouble focusing. But as you can see, the stories are beautifully drawn, lots of slapstick, a wonderful storytelling. And these two volumes deal with child trafficking, not a subject usually dealt with in comics, especially ones that are funny. A bunch of kids are basically abducted to work on for these guys illegally digging gold out of the Amazon. And two of them manage to escape, and aiding, of course, in their escape is Marsupilami and a number of other characters. Eventually, they find a lost city. I mean, this has everything you want in a big-time jungle adventure, plus the humor. And that's the important thing about these stories is they do have a story, they do have a compelling plot, there are suspenseful moments, there are things at risk, there are stakes, and in addition to all the humor and crazy slapstick goings on. Just excellent stuff. Marsupilami was extraordinarily popular in the 90s. I don't know how popular Marsupilami is in Europe to this day, but he's hugely popular in the 90s. I imagine with juvenile readers. But like all good juvenile fiction, there's enough here for an adult to read. It's well constructed and well crafted enough. These comics certainly do not pander to a younger audience. They present often challenging material, both emotionally and issues-wise. There's a little bit of pathos going on here to make the humor work. So I highly recommend any of the. I think there's been 8 Marsupilami books published by Cinebook, in addition to the initial Marsupilami adventures that appeared in the Spirou and Fantasio volumes. So if you're a fan of comics, or if you have kids that you'd like to see get interested in reading comics, this is a good entry point. Now, another book I read, I love movies, and I love movie bios about directors, actors, screenwriters. And one of my favorite actors of all time is Jimmy Stewart. So I wanted to know a little bit more about him. It turns out I already knew quite a bit about him, reading the biography, but I wanted to, fill in the details. Most people know Jimmy Stewart from It's a Wonderful Life. Even people that don't watch old movies have seen It's a Wonderful Life because it's endlessly rerun at Christmas time. And you get to see, it's not a bad preview or a bad introduction to Jimmy Stewart, because you get to see Stewart's almost the entire range of his acting ability, and he had incredible range, and I'll go on about that a little bit more later. But people always remember It's a Wonderful Life as he's the affable George Bailey, the likable small town everyman, and they always kind of forget the darker noirish elements of this movie, in which Jimmy Stewart is obviously victim of a nervous breakdown. He's literally suicidal. He's trying to kill himself, and it's a very, very dark story. And Stewart manages to run the gamut of all of the demands made of him as an actor. It's hard to think of any other actor ever who could have succeeded in the role of George Bailey when you think about it, because of all the demands, the acting demands made on him, that he had to make us believe in this character, who we see through every facet of his life. Every emotional, chime is rung with this character. And it's a testament to Stewart's range. But of course, Stewart was a prolific actor, hardworking actor, initially showed up in Hollywood playing like the boy next door in light comedies and things like that. But the funny thing is, and I learned this from the book, is his first actual filmed role was in After the Thin Man. And I won't spoil After the Thin Man by telling you any more about his character. But he plays what starts out as a minor character turns out to be a pivotal character in this, Nick and Nora Charles comedy, crime comedy. And it's a good thing that his first role wasn't, his first role he played was not the first role the public saw. This movie was put on the shelf for a while because Myrna Loy was suing the studio. She wanted more money. She wasn't being paid as much as William Powell. And she thought, I'm not a supporting actress. I'm the co-star. I should get the same amount as my co-star. And so the film was put on a shelf. And this was a good thing for Jimmy Stewart, because if this had been his first exposure to a broad audience, his career might have gone another way. And also, again, I don't want to spoil the movie, but the 4 or 5 films released before After the Thin Man that featured Stewart established him as the affable boy next door. And so when After the Thin Man comes along, this is a big contrast to the roles he had played before, and quite a shock to movie audiences, and who now began to realize, hey, there's more to this guy. So he really was, that Myrna Loy lawsuit was probably the biggest boon to his career he could have gotten early on in his career. For me, the book delves into some of my favorite Stewart roles. There's quite a lot about the development of the movie Destry Rides Again, which, if you've never seen, is one of the greatest comedy westerns ever made. It's a flawless, seamless piece of entertainment with some terrific acting from Jimmy Stewart, Marlene Dietrich, and a huge cast of Hollywood character actors. And what I did not know in this movie, and if you've ever seen it, you'll remember the fight scene. There's a bar fight. It's the most unforgettable bar fight ever to show up in a Western between Marlene Dietrich and actress Una Merkel. It's a fight between 2 women. and it's vicious, and it's savage, and it's violent. Remember, this is a comedy. And the book informed me that they were really fighting. that when Una Merkel realized that Dietrich was not pulling her punches, she wasn't faking. She was actually hitting her and actually pulling her hair and kicking her. Una Merkel's like, I don't want a stunt double. I want to actually finish this fight. And so if you've ever seen the movie, it's quite astounding that it's not stunt doubles. It's Marlene Dietrich and Una Merkel going at it for real, which really, really sold it. Plus, it's just an awesome comedy Western. And again, as in any comedy, it's got a terrific plot. There are real stakes. There's real pathos. There's real stuff going on that forms a background and a basis for the comedy to work. But it's just a hell of a movie. I watch this thing 2 or 3 times a year because it's just such a perfect example of Hollywood at its best. The book goes into, and this is one of the things I was more curious about because I didn't know a whole lot about this. It goes into Stewart's career as a bomber pilot in World War II. And my dad was a bombardier on B-17s in World War II and always interested me. And my dad always spoke so highly of Jimmy Stewart because Stewart could have gotten, he could have gotten a stateside job. He could have gotten some easy posting, but he fought and he clawed and he politicked and he campaigned to be a combat pilot. And he flew some extraordinarily dangerous missions over Europe, over Germany in a B-25 Mitchell bomber. And if you don't know about the air war over Europe, the attrition rates for our bomber pilots and our fighter pilots were appalling. And I did not know this. I mean, I knew that generally overall, the Army Air Corps suffered a 25% attrition rate, which is freaking shocking. 25%. 25% of the guys who took off died. What I did not know is that Jimmy Stewart's unit suffered 87% casualties. I mean, can you even imagine that? Can you imagine getting into a plane to fly a mission, pretty much knowing the odds are against you ever returning? Pretty much knowing that your number was up as soon as you got in that plane. But Stewart, despite the fact that the Army really wanted him to stop, and Hollywood really wanted him to stop, obviously his agent and the studios, they did not like him doing this. He kept doing it, and he kept flying, dangerous missions. They kept trying to keep him away from the more dangerous missions, and he would somehow maneuver his way around the officers and do it. One of his crew members even said that there was a point where they had dropped part of their load of bombs, and Stewart wasn't satisfied. They had hit the target, and he literally turned his plane around and went over the target a second time, which is near suicidal. Near suicidal. Now, the thing is that Stewart flew his full commitment of flights over Germany, well over 25 combat missions, and came home and suffered PTSD. We didn't know what, we didn't call it then. Nobody called it that then, but that's what it was. And he was a bit of a mess. But the thing is that this life-altering experience that he had going to war would inform his acting for the rest of his career. That as much range as he had before World War II, he had even more afterwards. And this was explored perfectly by his association with director Anthony Mann. Anthony Mann and Jimmy Stewart made a number of movies together, but the most important of the movies they made 5 Westerns together, all of them uniformly excellent. They definitely compete with John Ford and Howard Hawks as the best Westerns made in the 1950s. And the thing is, throughout the 1950s, Jimmy Stewart made only dramas. I mean, we remember him for comedies, but he didn't make one comedy in the 1950s. He made action dramas, military dramas, suspense films. entirely. And their association begins with Winchester 73, and Winchester 73 is the first hint we get of this deeper, darker range, even after It's a Wonderful Life, this deeper, darker range that Jimmy Stewart could reach as an actor. And the book says that when the movie was premiered in Hollywood, some people in the audience laughed when they saw Jimmy Stewart's name in the credits for a Western, because they thought, what's this guy doing in a Western, starring in a Western? And then early on in the film, we get a glimpse of why. Jimmy Stewart's character gets a little upset at someone and slams their head down onto a bar in a saloon. And then from there, Jimmy Stewart starts acting more and more obsessive, more and more nearly psychotic throughout the story. And we're not really sure why. His prize rifle has been stolen, but why is it so important? Well, it turns out it's not his rifle that's important, it's who stole it. And that's really the thing about the movie. And we get to see this part of Jimmy Stewart we've never seen before, where he's more driven, he's more obsessive, he's more he becomes like a mythic Freudian character over the course of all of these movies. Far Country is another one that's my favorite. The guy that wrote the book didn't think it was much of a movie. He thought it was the least of the Mann movies. I don't think it is, because it's about Stewart doing a cattle drive through the Yukon during the gold rush toward the end of the 1800s, and it's clear at the beginning of the movie that he's a little bit nuts. He's very self-centered, very driven, doesn't seem to care who he hurts to get what he wants. And this was not the Jimmy Stewart that audiences were used to seeing. Now, all these Westerns were extraordinarily successful for Universal. And part of the reason was this new depth to Stewart. I mean, in addition to, some terrific screenplays by Borden Chase, and of course, Anthony Mann's spot on direction, use of locale. This guy knew how to direct actors. He knew how to direct action. He knew how to put a story across. And their association would conclude with the fifth Western, Man from Laramie, in which has some of the most brutal beat-up scenes, violent scenes, sadistic scenes that had been seen in cinema up to this point. But this is kind of Man from Laramie was where they were kind of going with this Stewart character. Now, he didn't play the same character in each movie, but he could have, because in each of the Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart movies, he becomes more and more edgy, more and more driven, more and more obsessed, more of a borderline psychopathic character. It's unusual for a Western, but here it is. It cements his image. And of course, this is further cemented by his association with Alfred Hitchcock. He made 4 films with Hitchcock. And Hitchcock had a way of casting an actor and then building the film around him, tailoring the film to him. And once again, just as in It's a Wonderful Life, it's hard to imagine the movie Rear Window succeeding with any other actor but Jimmy Stewart, because I think any other actor, it would have seemed creepy, because it's about a guy spying on his neighbors all the time. But we never get that feeling from Stewart till the very end. There's this brilliant scene that I've discussed over and over and over again when Jimmy Stewart is finally confronted by the killer in this movie, where we begin to think, well, yeah, it is. Yeah, why is he doing this? It is a little bit creepy, staring out the window all the time at your neighbors. But up to that point, we're totally accepting. We're relating to Jimmy Stewart and his curiosity about the people that live around him, and how he's basically trapped in this one room because he's broken his leg severely. I mean, he's in a wheelchair. He can't move. He can't get up and down the stairs. He's relying on others to bring him stuff. I mean, he's an invalid for all intents and purposes. And his main source of entertainment is looking out the window at the neighbors at this marvelously constructed set on a Universal soundstage. If you've never seen Rear Window, for me, it's Hitchcock's masterpiece. And Stewart makes it work, because once again, it's hard to imagine any other actor buying any other actor in this role. And of course, we go on to what Hitchcock meant to be his masterpiece, Vertigo. And again, once again, Stewart is playing someone on the edge, and who's possibly hallucinating in his life. Vertigo is very much a dreamlike film. It was a huge failure at the box office, but it's an amazing piece of filmmaking. I just think that audiences weren't ready for it. It's almost like a tone poem as opposed to a suspense film. Now more on Stewart's range. The author of this book makes this brilliant point that I never knew and never really thought of, that on 30 separate occasions, Jimmy Stewart either replaced Gary Cooper or Cary Grant in a role, or they replaced him in a role. Cary Grant replaced Jimmy Stewart in North by Northwest. Don't know if you know that. Gary Cooper replaced Jimmy Stewart in Man of the West, Anthony Mann's last Western. So these Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart was seen as interchangeable by the studios and filmmakers with either Cary Grant or Gary Cooper. Now, when you think about it, if you know old movies, if you know old movie actors, it's hard to imagine two actors more different from one another than Gary Cooper and Cary Grant. You certainly wouldn't interchange them, and yet they would interchange them for Stewart or interchange Stewart for them, and everybody was fine with it. Now, that's the greatest testament to Jimmy Stewart's range as an actor that I can possibly imagine. So, and the other thing about it is when you think about it, we all refer to James Stewart as Jimmy. I can't think of another actor that that American audiences love so much that they just took on his nickname. He was never ever credited as Jimmy Stewart. It's always James Stewart, and yet we think of him as Jimmy. That is another testament to how much American movie audiences took this guy in, right? So, and anyway, that's it for me this week. Hey, Siege of the Black Citadel. Maybe this is what you should be reading. It's doing well. The second book is going to be out soon. Probably by the time you watch this video, it'll have been announced. We've got a final cover and all the rest of it. Next book is Caravan of the Damned. I have completed a third one. It is called The Pit of the Blind God. And I'm fooling around with the plot for a fourth one. So this may turn into a series for me. But this one's available now. You can buy it at Archaven Comics. If you buy it through Archaven Comics, you get a free ebook version, or you can go right to Amazon and pick it up. And that's it for me this week. That's what I'm reading. And I promise I'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'll see you down the road.